Let us now look at CSS positioning. Now in CSS you can specify the position of an element in four ways: static, fixed, relative, or absolute. So there are four positioning elements. The static is the first one. And when I say element, it can be anything. It can be an image, and it can be a box that you're using to put any of your text content and so on. Okay? And so here you have your position is specified as static, and the border is 3 pixels solid, and the color is specified for the border. So it says static is how the browser displayed the element by default, and it is not affected by the top, bottom, left, and right properties. So what it means is that even if you do not specify the position as static, it would be static by default. So let us look at an example. So this is a nice site which demonstrates different CSS positioning in a very easy way to understand. So this is the first one is static, and in this example here they have a few IDs over here, and a few divisions created. So here is a div before, div after, and then div 1, div 1a, and div 1b and 1c. Okay, and so for div 1, this one on the top, this black one, the position is specified as static. So the default positioning for all elements is position static, which means that element is not positioned and occurs where it normally would in the document. So you wouldn't need to specify this. So even when you don't specify it, it would still be the same. And then we have a division that is fixed, and this is a position relative to the viewpoint and stays in the same place even if the page is scrolled. So here you have at the bottom and right is specified as 0, and the width is 300 pixels, and these are the border properties specified. And the third is position relative. Here the width is 400 pixels and 200 pixels, and the border properties are specified. And relative means that it is relative to its normal positions. So if you specify relative as say minus 20 pixels, then it would be maybe to be towards the left. It will move left at 20 pixels. And then the last one is absolute, and the position is absolute. This is top 80 pixels, right 0, width and height that's specified over here, and the border is 3 pixels and so on. So it specifies the absolute position of the element on the page, and it is relative to the first parent element that doesn't use static positioning. So let's look at some examples to understand each of these. So we looked at static element in this example, where these are all where you have this div 1a in this place over here, and now we are moving to relative over here. So inside here, so if you specify the position as relative, then you can use top or bottom and left or right to move the element relative to where it would normally occur in the document. So let's say if we want to move this div 1 down 20 pixels and to the left 40 pixels, so then you would do down would be, you specify the top as 20 pixels, so this top part would move down 20 pixels, and you specify the left as minus 40 because you want it to move left 40 pixels. Okay, so this is what happens. This has moved down and moved left. So this is what relative is doing relative to its normal position. And notice that the space where div 1 normally would have been, if we had not moved it, now it is an empty space, this part. The next element, that is div after over here, this one, did not move when we moved div 1. And that's because div 1 still occupies that original space in the document even though we have moved it, okay, using relative. And it appears that position relative is not very useful, but if we perform an important task, so it is useful at some points when we use it along with other positioning elements, other positioning methods. So here we have the position absolute, and this is where you find this div 1a moving over here. The element is removed from the document and placed exactly where you tell it to go in an absolute position. So you're asking that the div 1a to move to the top right of the page. So you say top is 0 and right is 0. So it moves to the absolute top right. Okay. So since the div 1a was removed from the document, the other elements on the page now were positioned differently. So a div 1b and div 1c and div after, these were moved up since div 1a was no longer there. And also notice that div 1a was positioned in the top right corner of the page. It's not nice to be able to position things directly on the page, but again, this is of limited value. And what I really want is to position div 1a relative to div 1. So you'd want to position this in relation to this other element rather than on its own hanging somewhere. And that's where the relative position which was there, that would come back into play. So now if we use the relative and the absolute together, and then let's see what happens. So it's saying, the div 1 is set to be relative now, and your div 1a has an absolute position. So if you set relative positioning on div 1, any elements within div 1 will be positioned relative to div 1. Then if we set absolute positioning on div 1a, we can move it up to the top right of div 1a. Now it is not at the top right of the page in general, but in this element here is positioned relative to the top right of this element of div 1a. So it's useful in that sense as a absolute position, the position within a relative position over here. And this is an example of a two-column absolute, a two-column layout using relative and absolute positioning. So your div 1, so you have your div before, and then you have a div 1 which is relative, and within div 1 you have your div 1a and div 1b. And we're saying that this div 1a, which is the red one over here, is on the top right. The top is 0, right is 0. And for div 1b, it is top is 0, left is 0. So this is positioned to the top right, and this is positioned to the top left of the div 1, the 1a element, of the div 1 element. And here you have the two-column absolute height. So one solution is to set a fixed height on the elements. And this is not a viable solution for most design because we usually do not know how much text will be in the elements or the exact font sizes that will be used. So here you again have a div before and div after, and you have div 1, the black one, and you say the position is relative, and you're specifying the height of this black portion as 250 pixels. And within that you're saying that your div 1a and div 1b are in absolute positions like before. This is on the div 1a is on the top right, and then div 1b is on the top left.